Right, welcome back. We do apologize for that hitch with our sound. But as we start, today is the 13th day of June 2013, and all members of the East African community, save for Burundi, will be presenting their respective budget estimates for the fiscal year 2013-2014. Back at home, a lot has changed in regards to the budget reading process, largely occasioned by the requirements of Kenya's new constitution. Gone are the days when the country would experience a colorful ceremony with the finance minister presenting the voluminous document before the floor of the House. The trend hasn't since changed, since we now have cabinet secretaries who is not necessarily a member of the House. Today the budget will witness a departure from what the law requires Treasury and the Budget Making Committee to present their estimates 2 months to the reading of the budget. Now, the new laws will see the leader of majority in Parliament present the estimates and thereafter the finance bill. Now, the changes in the budget-making process are worth noting. Kenya now enjoys increased participation of key stakeholders in this vital process. The highlight being public participation. There was also the formation of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of Parliament that was tasked with looking through the estimates and revenue expenditure. A committee has proceeded to recommend reductions and increments in the 2013-2014 estimates. So just why is this budget so important to you? Now, it is the first budget under the devolved government systems, and it will see hefty allocations first to the devolved units, but also for the implementation of the constitutions. It is also the first budget under the Jubilee government. The country first hit the 1 trillion budget mark in the year 2012, and this year will set a new high slated at 1.62 trillion shillings. Now, the budget 2013-2014 estimates have come under serious criticism, with analysts arguing that the government should now focus on prudent spending rather than tax collection. Right, and from those matters, now you have a picture of exactly what you're getting on this afternoon. I'll now throw you over to my colleague Michael Karanja, who's at Parliament Buildings, to bring us the very latest as to what is happening in preparations of this great afternoon.
Right, thank you, Tunya. As you said, rightfully mentioned, we are coming to you live from Parliament Buildings, where in like 2 hours, Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich is expected to table before the House the budget statement as well as the finance bill. Like you rightfully said there before, it will be a departure from what Kenyans are used to, where the pomp and color behind what budget used to be there will no longer be there. So now what we expected to hear, well, what we've been told from people within Parliament is that the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich is going to come and sit in the House as an observer, or just as a private citizen, and thereof before and at a certain time he will be called upon by the Speaker of the House to table the finance bill as well as the budget statement. Thereafter, at about 3:30, 4 o'clock, the House will break, but reconvene, where now the Parliamentary Budget and Appropriation Committee will take over, and now whatever will go on from there will be like a House, will be like a committee sitting. Now there is where the Cabinet Secretary will be able to divulge more of what is in the finance bill, of how they plan to finance this hefty budget. Like you rightfully said, 1.6 trillion shillings is the highest in Kenya's 50-year history. We saw the tendencies way back in 2011 when then Finance Minister Uhuru Kenyatta tabled a budget of about approximately 980 billion shillings. Thereafter, in the 2012-2013 budget, we saw it rise rather to about 1.1 trillion shillings. Now, with the growth to about 1.64 trillion shillings, it is expected that budgets in this country will continue growing, more so because of what now the country is going through, and that's the devolved system of government, which has brought about different changes to how budget process is made. But one point that the Parliamentary Budget and Appropriation Committee noted yesterday when they were presenting their statement on how they have rejigged the budget estimates given to them by the National Treasury is that Kenya's budget is annually on an incremental level. Now, what they're saying is that they should get a balance on where there is more going towards the devolved budget and less going towards the recurrent expenditure. Right now, the shift is about 57% is going towards government expenditure, while 43% is going to development agenda. Now, this is something even the Budget Committee noted, and they've been trying to rejig how the monies are going to be spent by the Treasury, and this is now going to be interesting. Now, coming to what's going to be this afternoon is now we're going to hear from the Cabinet Secretary himself on how they plan to finance. people are crying.
Right, that is Michael Karanjan. We'll be getting back to Michael later on this afternoon with when we'll be expecting the estimates to be presented in the House. But what we do know right now is that, departure from what we've seen in history, is that these estimates will actually be presented by the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich in the floor of the House. Now, how will this happen? The House will adjourn, where the Leader of Majority, that is Aidan Duale, will seek leave from the Speaker, where the House will be converted into House of the Whole Committee, or Committee of the Whole House, if you like, and there the Speaker will summon the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, who will in turn present these estimates, and we'll be crossing over to Parliament later on at about 3 o'clock to give you the very latest as and when this will be happening. But talking of matters, budget and figures, I'm joined by a man with a very, very bright name, Einstein Kihanda. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much.
From ICA Lion. Now,
Thank
Einstein, we're talking about 1.6 trillion. We haven't seen such a big budget in the history of this country. What are your expectations going forward this afternoon?
I think in terms of expectations, obviously, as you say, it's a historical figure,
right.
1.6 trillion.
Right.
And of course, there are a lot of, this being the first budget by the Jubilee government,
right.
There are a lot of expectations that a lot of the priorities that have already been highlighted in the manifesto will actually be implemented. We've already seen some of those, for instance, the free maternity health care.
Correct.
We'll also be expecting a lot in terms of discussions regarding the investment and in infrastructure. But I think also it's also important to highlight the fact that as much as the expenditure items are quite significant,
right.
There is a challenge of how to finance that expenditure.
Yes.
That means that you're talking about revenue collection. You also issues about how much of that is going to be external and internal borrowing. So I think that is also an important aspect of it.
Now, and of course, we're looking at, traditionally we've had more than 70% going to recurrent expenditure, and what remains goes into development. But also the debate has been, should we focus on expanding the tax bracket and collecting more tax, or should we focus on prudent measures? Why should we have 70% going into recurrent expenditure?
Yes, that's a very important question, because the public sector wage issue is a very big issue, and of course it's dominated the headlines over the last few weeks.
Correct.
And the challenge obviously is, as a developing economy, it is not sustainable for us to be spending over 70% of our revenue on a recurrent expenditure.
Right.
We need to spend a lot more on development, and there are two ways to. Some of the ways to look at it is obviously, first of all, do we widen the tax bracket? If you look at the last 10 years, the growth that we've seen in revenue collection, a lot of it has to do with widening of the tax bracket, sealing of a lot of loopholes. But now, with more and more financing requirements, there's also the question of what is it that can be done in terms of prudently managing our costs.
Correct.
There has been talk about, for instance, the VAT bill that will try and seal some of the loopholes that have to do with tax refunds.
Yes.
But there's also the question of, do we need to rationalize our public sector in terms of which are the most, what are the best numbers for us?
And no one is talking about that, because the President has said so many times the wage bill is something we cannot carry. Everyone knows that.
Yes.
If the focus has been, okay, should we bring up the VAT bill? VAT contributes about, what, 24 to 26%?
Yes.
We still have a bulk that we're not talking about.
Yes.
From where you sit, why is there difficulty in having this conversation about prudent spending?
I think, first of all, because when you talk about rationalizing in terms of the public sector numbers, that is a very politically sensitive issue, because you're talking about in terms of, for instance, reducing the number of staff in terms of government. I think politically that's obviously a very sensitive issue, especially when we recall that in the 90s we had a similar situation when we had the IMF and the structural adjustment programs that resulted in retrenchment, and a lot of people were sent home. So it's obviously a sensitive issue, and we've also seen that happening in the last 1 month or so, when we're having the Salaries and Remuneration Commission actually continues and talking about the public sector wage. So it's an expensive issue to talk about.
It hasn't gotten the excitement that we expect. Anyway, Einstein, we'll be carrying on this discussion with you later on this afternoon, as we'll be sitting and expecting that to happen. But then those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. I've been speaking to Einstein Kihanda from ICA Lion, and he'll be here with us all afternoon to help us just make sense of what the figures that we'll be receiving from the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, and going forward looking also into the finance bill. So you do want to stay tuned. But still, talking of matters money, all senators today made good their threat to move to the Supreme Court to seek an advisory opinion on the controversial Division of Revenue bill signed into law earlier this week. But the senators this morning filed a petition at the Supreme Court, and they say they believe the court will heed their plea. Our senior reporter Aaron Ocheng now joins us from the City Centre studio with the very latest from this matter.
Yeah, right, Bonitunya, as you've said, the senators made good their threat, and today, this morning, they marched from the Kenyatta International Conference Center, that is where their chambers are based, and walked straight to the Supreme Court and filed this particular case. They are led by a councillor, the senior counsel Feroz Norji, and lawyer Kyoko Kulukumi, and they're saying they have a very strong case against the executive and also against the National Assembly. They're saying that the President and the National Assembly overlooked the senators' input in drafting this particular bill, and this morning they walked to the Supreme Court and filed this particular petition. They are saying they expect the Supreme Court to move with speed and execute this particular case. This is what the senators were saying earlier today.
We have now filed reference number 2, seeking an advisory opinion from the Supreme Court on the issues which are now raised in this reference. Since this matter is now properly before the Supreme Court, and any discussions of the merits of what is in this reference is sub judice, I will leave it to you to look at the reference to see the kind of questions that have been raised for purposes of an advisory opinion from the Supreme Court.
We have filed an advisory opinion which is different from a contentious opinion. I think that clarity is extremely important, because there are those people who want to benefit from processes like this ones. They need to be reminded this is not a contentious matter, so we have not sued anybody. We are just seeking clarity, legal clarity, on a question that we think is of national importance.
Our request as senators, and you can see we are very many of us here, is that the Supreme Court moves with speed, because the clock is ticking, and we would like to move the resources to our counties as quickly as possible in the manner which is set out by the law and the Constitution.
Right, Aaron Ocheng, we are seeing the first bill to be debated by both houses. It has resulted in contestation. Is this setting a bad precedent for both houses?
Bonnie, what I would say is that this new constitution has some loopholes. And yesterday, when the senators met the governors in a particular hotel here in Nairobi, those are some of the things that they were pointing out. Actually, they were saying that they will also be seeking an amendment to some of the clauses in the constitution. Because if you look at the constitution, it says that the Senate will only recommend the amount of money that should be sent to the counties. But the final say lies with the National Assembly. And once the National Assembly passes and overlooks what the Senate says, it gives them a straight mandate, and it leaves a very small room for the senators to bargain on this particular matter. So we will be waiting to see what the Supreme Court will rule or give an interpretation, because this particular matter is twofold. Both the Senate and the National Assembly have a room to base their argument from. Bonnie.
All right, many thanks, Aaron. Of course, we'll be expecting more from you in our subsequent bulletins on that particular matter pitting the two houses. Back to Edith for more news.
All right, before we go to the more news, those are very sobering figures that you were talking about. 1.6 trillion for the budget, and I know that our debt is astronomical.
Of course, and what is sad is that it's more like we're operating a credit card. We are spending before we earn it.
Oh well, I'm sure we'll have all those details in the business segment, so do stay tuned for that. But elsewhere, 2 adults and a child sustained serious injuries this morning, and that's when a Compiera Academy school van lost control and lost control along Valley Road. Eyewitnesses say the accident occurred after a tire burst, causing the driver to lose control of the vehicle. 9 children have since been treated and discharged.
Good Samaritans trying to calm down children after an early morning accident. The school van had set out to collect school-going children from Compuera Academy, but it would not reach its destination. As it headed down Valley Road, it rolled and came to a stop at this spot, just before Integrity Center.
Sasa hii gari mguu imepasuka, tukafikiria ni gari yetu. Sasa kupasuka, mpasuka na huko juu. Sasa amekuja ndiye amelose control yakaingia hapa.
The passengers, children who were being ferried to school, were bewildered by this turn of events, wailing uncontrollably on realizing that their teacher had been injured in the accident, leaving them to the mercy of good Samaritans. It would fall to these two gentlemen and lady to try to calm the pupils down and locate their parents or guardians. They would go through the list of children to be picked, trying to ascertain who was in the van at the time of the accident. A matatu that was headed to town deposited passengers at a nearby bus stop and offered to rush the injured to nearby hospitals. Nine students were treated and discharged. The driver, who sustained serious injuries, the teacher and one child have been admitted in hospital. Wilkes Anyabwa, KTN News Desk.
It appears to be more bad news as police in the North Rift are looking for a woman in Suburb Village, that's in Elgeyo Marakwet County, because she allegedly torched her 3 children at their home earlier this morning. Reports indicate that the woman, who is now at large, woke up at around 4 a.m. on Thursday, locked her children, who were aged between 3 and 5, in her house before setting it ablaze. She then fled as she left the children to burn beyond recognition. Police have since launched investigations and a manhunt for the woman. Our reporters are currently on the ground as we speak, and we will have more information on this unfortunate incident in our subsequent bulletins. All right, let's now take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about those staggering figures we were talking about. 216 billion is what the government has set aside to pay off debts, and guess who's going to pay for it?
You and I.
Yep, you and I.
More news after this short break. Welcome back to the program. Being the budget day, let's talk about some more figures. As the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury steps before the House this afternoon to read his budget, the questions and concerns will be on how best he can save the ordinary Kenyans the tax agony while fixing the economy. Philip Keitani spoke to experts and filed this report.
Budget 2013-2014 in association with ICEA Lion Group.
The government has historically increased its annual budget since independence, and with a growing population, economy and increased development, this is justified. However, it's also prudent that once in a while policymakers should stop and take a moment to think whether or not we can actually afford it.
If the current budget as it is approved, and if we work with the 2012-2013 tax collection, the actual amount of tax collection, then we are actually potentially looking at budget deficit as high as above 15%, which is really way above the recommended levels.
The readily available options that could easily address the budget financial headache will be raising taxes. However, it will be seen as a heinous move by the new administration to even think of this.
The level of tax collection and the level of tax receipts, it actually has a direct relation with economic growth. If the economy is not growing, then you do expect your tax receipts to go down. So I think also the government also has to do a lot of business development behind the scenes to make sure that the economy is actually growing, because over the last 2 years the economy is not growing.
As a result, concerns are likely to be directed at the inefficiency in spending tax money, the ability to broaden the tax base, and the avoidance of falling too deep into debt. As the government presents the country's first budget statement under the devolved system of governance, it should have in mind that the country's revenue growth has been stunted over the past several years. Amid subdued economic expansion, there is need to control state spending on non-priority areas. In order to maintain the country's growth in an upward trajectory, the government should put more focus on capital expenditure, cutting down on recurrent expenditure where possible, as well as reviewing its tax policy, including removing some exemptions and strengthen tax-paying compliance to increase revenue.
On a larger scale, it's a point of the government that they also need to streamline certain operations, in terms of decision making. It doesn't have to be very complex. So if you have an efficient decision-making government, then some of these things can be easily weeded out,
Kenya also need to identify and pump more money on sectors with more potential, with traditional sectors of agriculture, which constitute 24% of the country's GDP, as well as manufacturing and ICT sectors expected to play a key role. In the past decade, infrastructure contributed 0.5 percentage points to Kenya's annual per capita GDP growth, raising the country's infrastructure endowment to that of Africa's middle-income countries could increase that contribution by 3 percentage points. This plus other critical areas can indeed save Kenya's economy while putting it to the road to prosperity.
Budget 2013-2014 in association with ICEA Lion Group.
Well, the next one is a bit interesting. Now, if debt was a ministry, it would get the largest single allocation in this year's budget. Now, Kenya has set aside a staggering 216 billion shillings servicing both internal and external loans. This is equivalent to 18 billion shillings every month and is higher than the entire allocation the county governments are getting of just about 210 billion shillings. Now, the allocation to the Teachers Service Commission of 140 billion with 300 billion shillings budget deficit in the 2013-2014 budget. Now, this burden of serving debt is likely to rise even further. Kenya now wants all the three arms of government to rationalize their spending, to reduce expenditure, expand revenue streams, and limit borrowing to ensure debt levels remain sustainable.
The proposal so far is to spend 215 billion Kenya shillings, which is close to about 18 billion shillings a month, paying debt alone. Now, if you take that 216 billion, it's more than 10% of our total expenditure. So more than 10%, close to 11% of our total expenditure, in as much as we say this is a big budget, and it is big, is being spent redeeming debt and interest. That's a huge amount. There's no ministry that comes even close. So if we took debt payments as a ministry, it's the largest single item on which we spend money apart from salaries.